Well, a very good morning to you and welcome to yet another special program, of course, focusing on the life and times of Dr. Geingob. Since the early days, Namibia has always enjoyed sound relations with the United Nations and its specialized agencies. This is much due to the UN recognizing Namibia's plight and was the turning point in Namibia's quest for independence with the development, adoption and implementation of Resolution 435 and the role of the United Nations Transitions Assistance Group UNTAG in the country's very first election for Constituent Assembly. Well, a very good day. Of course, in terms of the special tribute broadcast here on NBC, with me, Ricardo, Goagoseb, I'll be in your company for the next 2 to 3 hours. And today we focus, of course, on Namibia's relations with the United Nations and its interagencies. Now, just reflecting back on where it all started in 1964 at the tender age of 23, Dr. Geingob was appointed SWAPO representative at the United Nations and to the Americas, where he remained until 1989. And in today's special tribute broadcast, we reflect on Dr. Geingob's contribution to Namibia's diplomatic relations, particularly with a focus on the UN and the state of those relations today. And I'm joined in the studio, of course, by the United Nations resident coordinator, as well as the coordinators from the different agencies in the country. And I just want to start off, of course, with the introductions. Very good morning to you, and thank you so much for making time out to join us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Immediately on our immediate right is Dr. Mary Brantuo, in charge of the World Health Organization, Namibia's office. A very good morning to you, Doctor. Thank you so much for making time out to join us.
Good morning, and thank you.
And of course, we have the UN resident coordinator, Ms. Hopolong, Pororo. Of course, you are responsible overall for the United Nations here in the country. Thank you so much for making time out to join us as well.
Thank you so much for inviting us, and we are glad to be here this morning.
Ms. Alka, Bhatia, representing the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. Very good morning, and thank you for making time out to join us.
A very good morning to you and to the viewers today. Thank you.
And of course, UNICEF, what conversation can we have without the UNICEF being represented as part of the UN agencies here? And we are joined by Mr. Samuel Okran, UNICEF representative. Thank you so much, Mr. Okran, for making time out to join us this morning as well.
Thanks for inviting us as one UN, and I'm pleased to be part of this time.
Well, I'm quite excited, of course, to also have you here in the studio, even though we are meeting under this somber circumstances. Just to, I think, start off as a starting point, let me start with you, Mr. Pororo. How did the news of the president's passing reach you, and what were some of your immediate reactions when you heard that news?
Very shocked, because of course, I just woke up and I hear that, His Excellency is not around any longer, and so it was really a big shock. And so I, of course, then naturally, you feel I felt, for the family, felt also for the former First Lady. I felt also for the Namibia as generally, because he had really played such an instrumental role, not only here in Namibia, in the region, in Africa, and even beyond, globally as well. So it was really just, oh my gosh, but at the same time saying he has also put some foundations on certain things which can be done going forward as well. Yeah.
Ms. Bhatia, how did the news reach you, and what was your initial reaction to hearing this news as well?
Disbelief. And I got this news around 3:30. I still remember. I got a phone call actually. And just prior to that, of course, I had been reading some of the things which were happening that in terms of his being in hospital, and actually prayed just before getting into bed, and then I was woken up with this thing. And thereafter, obviously, I couldn't sleep, and it was a lot of disbelief and obviously a shock, and kind of overcome with a great deal of sadness. Felt bereft, basically, at that point in time.
But Mr. Okran, of course, it's not always that we see a sitting head of president pass while he's still in office, an unprecedented event. What were your initial reactions to after you've heard this news?
First of all, I woke up in the morning and I saw a text message from a colleague, and I was really shocked. I was shocked because just last year, November, I had the opportunity to meet the president. And little did I know that that was the last time I was going to meet him. So it was shocking, really shocking. But after listening to the tribute coming and also knowing what is done for the country and the world at large and also the UN, I thought that while we mourn, it's also a time for us to celebrate his legacy. I think he fought a good fight, and he completed the race very well.
There isn't much that we can ask from him. 82 years,
No.
over 60 years in public service. Dr. Brantuo, what was your reaction, of course, and how did the news reach you?
The news reached me very early on Sunday morning. I tend to wake up early sometimes, and I looked at my phone, and I was so shocked, So I was really shocked. I woke up my husband. I said, "This is the news that has come through." It was very shocking. I have met His Excellency Dr. Geingob on 2 occasions with the head of the WHO Global, Dr. Tedros, and also with my former representative, Dr. Sego Moses. And one of the things that struck me about Dr. Geingob, he was a people's person. Each time you met him, he reached out to you to find out, what is your name? How come I haven't met you before? That was the thing that struck me. And really, it was such a shocking thing. And it's been sad, but I think we also have had a chance to relive his memories, his legacy. So it has been a sad time, but I think it has been an opportunity for the country to mourn together, to come together to mourn, and also to celebrate the successes that have been achieved through his life.
Talking about the successes, I think it tracks back for over half a century. We're looking at public service of over 60, 65 years with the president. Let's start at the beginning. I think in terms of that relationship with the United Nations begins really as him being the representative of SWAPO and then setting up the United Nations Institute for Namibia in Lusaka. Let's track back there, Ms. Pororo, particularly that historical perspective. I mean, at such a tender age of 23, 24, I remember what I was getting up to at 23, 24, and it wasn't definitely fighting for the liberation of a country. Let's reflect on that a little bit.
Well, I would think from where he started would probably be, he probably had a vision for the country, yeah, and he wanted to be part of that vision, yeah. So even, I think when we look at what he has been accomplishing today, you can see that he's been looking forward. And good example which we can give is that because maybe when I met up with him, I can say when I met up with him, that was last year, we talked about young people, we talked about youth employment, and he was a great storyteller. So he then went on to talk about, the efforts of leaders such as the Nyereres and Nkrumahs, and he said, those were the first wave of leaders, and he said that, he was also now the ones who came after. So for me, I get the impression that even from that tender age of 23, he had a vision, and he wanted to be part of that vision, and hence then working in the United Nations gave him an opportunity. Also, I believe, to learn, because the UN is very vast in its outreach, so he also would learn a lot of things which he would be able then to be put into action, especially when he then formed or was part of the institute as well. So for me, this is really what strikes me, is that he had a vision and it was clear. And even as we talk, as I mentioned or went back and talked about young people, he was looking to say, okay, the employment opportunities, green hydrogen is a place where young people can work, and is also solving the bigger problem of the environment and climate change. So for me, that's someone who really had a vision, and that's what I would, really say is a good reminder as us being part of, or him being one of our colleagues as well in the United Nations.
But in terms of that, I think, Mr. Alkran, also just piggybacking, of course, on that experience within that space, if we're looking at the kind of support and the role that the UN plays in terms of multilateralism, the kind of support that Namibia has received, And I know the President has always been saying that we are really a child of international solidarity. Just reflect on that a little bit in terms of the kind of support that was provided to Namibia at the dawn of its independence, and why it was important to even put boots on the ground to make sure that these elections of the Constituent Assembly were successful.
Yeah. What I would say is that I think the President is someone who is very grateful. He is a very grateful person. He never stopped talking about the fact that, the UN gave birth to Namibia, or the UN played a significant part. And I mean, this is a long time ago, but he still recognized that. The other thing I would say about the President is he's also someone who unites people, because I recall when I met him in November, he said, he started reflecting on what his visions are for the people of Namibia. He talked about the youth. He talked about the need to make sure the youth is prepared to take over from them. And for that reason, he highlighted why he agreed to set up the Children's Parliament, for example. And he mentioned the fact that from the Children's Parliament, we've been able to get leaders, ministers from there. And this was something that he was very, very proud of, ensuring that the youth participate in decision-making through the Children's Parliament and also engage children. Now, at the same time, he also mentioned the fact that he championed and agreed to the World Children's Day celebration regionally, where you have other heads of state, 3 joining him, so you have 4 heads of state joining that event, and all in an attempt to make sure that he build capacity within the country, make sure the youth have the capacity to be able to advance the governance structure that has been set up. And not just that, but he also talked about the unity within the sub-region in terms of SADC, and he said, look, he wants to see this. In fact, he challenged the heads of states to not just increase it to SADC countries, but also make sure in Africa as a whole. And the last part, in terms of unity, how he thinks about unity, uniting the people in this country. He said when he thought about the Harambee prosperity plan, he was looking for a word. And for the unity of the country, he decided not to pick any language internal, and he picked one from outside, just to make sure that, different tribes will not feel, why are you picking our language and not the other? He picked the Harambee. Thank you.
In terms of that, if you look at that as well, and one of the things that he continues to say, of course, that we are still a child of international solidarity, and UN gave birth to it, was because Resolution 435 delivered Chapter 3 as we have it in the Constitution right now, our inalienable rights and freedoms. And through that, we've seen Namibia, of course, number 1 on the continent in terms of freedom of speech, 4th in the world, and so on. Just to briefly reflect on the importance, of course, of the support and respect for human rights, of course, coming through Resolution 435 and us being able to maintain that. Can you reflect on that a little bit, Ms. Bhatia and Dr. Brantuo also on that?
It's been highlighted over and over again, and very correctly so, that he was actually a champion of the people. And he really had at his heart, I don't know whether it was because at a very tender age he was exposed to all the ideals and the principles, the founding principles of the United Nations in terms of non-discrimination, in terms of respect for human rights, because I think it was that vision which Hopolong was saying, which he brought with him when he came back to the country. It was that vision which he wanted to transmit to his fellow citizens and Namibians when he asked the UN that the UNMIS, the institute, be set up in Lusaka. In fact, I also had the privilege and honor of meeting him last in November only, late in November. In fact, I had a very engaging conversation with him on that. And he, as my colleagues have mentioned, he never let any opportunity go to appreciate the role of the UN into the coming of being on that. And he told me, he says, you know what, and you know his engaging style, which is so very endearing actually. He would talk to you and he had such a rich experience to also share, because some of this we are coming in now. You know, we didn't know some of these facts which he has lived through. And particularly on this institute, he says, you know, you gave us money to put this together. Obviously, there were other institutes with the financial support at that time, and, you know, with us being very strong on governance, and we wanted to also promote that. And that whole human rights, the non-discrimination, that's where that all started to build up. But it was also his own conviction. And I think throughout his positions, public service, so 60 years of public service, he never let go of that. Because at heart, he was that people's person. He knew, and he would not then discriminate. Like Sam said, even a small thing like not bringing in the language, because he was acutely aware, as you know, you don't need me to tell you about the ethnic divisions in the country and how he united everybody around that. And for that, I mean, he's a great inspiration. He's a statesman, and he is an example. We talk about him as a Pan-Africanist, a strong votary of multilateralism. And you saw how the UN came together, all the member states came together to acknowledge that and pay tribute to him. And we are fortunate here as the UN to have had that opportunity to have interacted with him. I've done that, and we, in fact, last November, as I said, he actually floored all of us. We were 45 representatives from the sub-Saharan African countries. He was so kind enough to invite everybody over, and the kind of wisdom that he imparted. People are coming from very different, diverse, conflict-ridden countries, and they were amazed that a head of state has that foresight. He's announcing, this is my last term. So everybody, in fact, asked him, say, no president on this continent has ever said that he is stepping down and this is ahead of his time. But he was so clear, the whole thing about institutions, processes, strong institutions, and he wanted to respect that. And that is all threaded through on a foundation of human rights.
That's a very, very important one. Doctor, you want to add value to that?
Yes, I would say that one of the core principles of the United Nations is leave no one behind. And that is something that the late President, His Excellency, Dr. Hage Geingob, he embodied in a number of, in his commitments as well as in his actions. In that regard, if you look at one of the documents that he championed, which my colleagues have talked about, the Harambee Prosperity Plan, one of the considerations in the Harambee Prosperity Plan is the fact that there was the need to reduce deaths of women who were dying from childbirth. And one key consideration that even one woman dying was one woman too much dying from childbirth. And with this approach, it meant that everyone had to be taken care of. It meant that we needed to adopt a universal health coverage approach, making sure that everyone had access to care. And this was running through the Harambee Prosperity Plan in the first one and also in the second one, which sought to increase access to healthcare for all the people of Namibia. So you realize that in his commitments, as indicated in some of these documents, it showed that he really believed in the core principle of leave no one behind. He also believed in a just and equitable society, an inclusive society, making sure that care and services were available for everyone. In terms of some of the experiences that we shared with him, one of the experiences that I would like to recall was in 2018. At the time, there was an outbreak, a hepatitis E outbreak. And this outbreak was in Katatura, and it was in the informal settlements, and it was associated with hygiene, availability of hygiene and sanitation. So as president, he led the response. He went with the health workers to Katatura to walk through the riverbeds to look at the situation, to see what was the situation that was causing this illness, that was reaching those who were poor, who were marginalized. And he led that response. He supported us as we provided our support, as we worked together with the government, the people of Namibia, to address this hepatitis E epidemic that we had in 2018. Beyond that, beyond Katatura, he also went to the hospitals to see how were the hospitals set up to address this situation. And that demonstrates really someone who is interested in the rights of everyone, that there is no one, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter how high or how low you are. So he really demonstrated and believed in the Namibian house. So we actually...
So it wasn't just a nice phrase to say, but actually
Exactly.
was put into action.
He demonstrated it. So yes, we were all encouraged by that, the fact that we were all felt part of the Namibian house, and he worked alongside with us in that regard.
The issue around, I think, the transparency and accountability are very important notions and virtues for United Nations in as far as governance is concerned, Ms. Pororo. Reflect on that a little bit, because we know, of course, he was always talking about accountability, always talking about transparency, and the need of always making sure that we use international best practices in governance. Reflect a little bit on that leadership style and governance and that transparency aspect and why that was important. Remember being, if not probably, arguably one of the first presidents, African president, to get into office and say, listen, here's my asset, I'm going to disclose what my assets are. This is everything that is in my state. Anything else, when I'm done here, please hold me responsible and accountable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So definitely from, exactly what you've just said, it's very clear that as an individual, he had principles, yeah? And these principles, it was not just that you do it like to the rest of his cabinet or to other government ministers, but it was, I'm going to lead by example. And for me, I think that also too is a sign of a great leader, because if you're able to lead by example and able to disclose, it shows you've got no hidden business and this is what you would want. So definitely, His Excellency Dr. Geingob was someone of great principles and definitely very transparent in terms of how he dealt with the issues as, put them on the table. Now, I think the issue is that even when we look at this, and as you've mentioned and said, an organization like the UN where we uphold those values, is that even as we talk now in our programming, which we've done at country level, governance is is an important pillar in the work that we do as the UN. So the idea or the point there then is really to help to unpack how governance would look like and what it would mean in reality in the country, and then supporting government to be able to do that as well. But when it comes from the head of state, I think it helps in making the work a little bit more easier. But what I want to do with that specific item, I want to throw it to Alka. Yeah, because Alka is also the one who is chairing that specific pillar on the work that we do here in Namibia on governance. Yeah?
Yes, Alka.
Okay, so he was the one who set up the Anti-Corruption Commission.
Yes.
What kind of a message did that send out? And his famous mantra about transparency plus accountability equals trust. That is what he wanted that message to go down the line. The Anti-Corruption Commission was set up. I mean, yes, there are different views about it, but you can't doubt his intention in terms of providing that accountability in public life for public servants, for everybody, to follow. His initiative, as I would say, which was actually supported a lot by the UN, our agency, UNESCO, in terms of press freedom, right? Media freedom. We are internationals, we coming from outside. I've served in 3-4 other African countries, but the kind of press or the newspapers or the news coverage I have seen over here, which actually is, hats off to this country for allowing that freedom of speech. No wonder that this country is scoring so high. Things may not be perfect, but where are they? But I think this is a great beginning. The government has gone forward with the Access to Information Bill, and this is something which has been championed a lot by the UN, particularly our sister agencies in the UNESCO. And now we will see the sort of the fruits of that. So for us, that is the strong incentive. Then I again come back to what has been so often been mentioned here, his focus on systems, his focus on processes, his focus on institutions. So strong institutions are the ones which guarantee transparency and accountability and that continuity. That's why we lay so much emphasis. And I think, again, going back to his formative time within the UN, he's coming up with this idea and running that UN Institute. These are all of those founding blocks, I think, which gave him that vision.
And many were saying, of course, in terms of the transition, I mean, as Namibians, we really did not have any concern around any civil strife or so ever on that particular Sunday morning. Many of the friends are, is the military on the street, is the police? What's going to say? No, we are just mourning. We don't have any concern around that. So could that also be, can we arguably say now that those principles around the rule of law and the systems and processes have really permeated within all civil life if we see the kind of small transition that we had on Sunday?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and you mentioned a good point in that, because we got messages from our regional and our headquarters, because they are used to what happens across sub-Saharan Africa. So when a sitting president is no more, I mean, our security agencies were in high gear, alert, bombarding us with messages.
So what's going on the ground there?
What's going on the ground? So we had to kind of say, no, this is fine. This is a beacon of peace. This country is a beacon of peace, not only across the continent. So there is a lot to learn from Namibia and Namibians. And a lot of this credit goes to the kind of work, the founding work which the late President Geingob has done, formulating the constitution in such a manner, ensuring that transparency in terms of succession. I think he had really, I don't know whether he had a premonition or what, I don't know, but he had kind of planned this.
The whole journey.
The whole, yes.
And to think about the last amendments that were done to the Constitution were on the Vice President. And that now allowing that transition.
That transition, absolutely. Yes. And so, I mean, this is such a great example for the world. And it makes us all very privileged and honored and proud to be serving in a country like this.
Ricardo, just a point too, which I just want to add to what Alka has said, is that I think it also goes to trust building, which I think even when you look at what's happening globally, and often the Secretary General talks to the fact that, multilateralism is falling apart because of the lack of trust. So this is one thing which definitely His Excellency championed, is really to build trust around the Namibian people, because if you don't trust each other, that's when then it becomes difficult to disclose, etc. So this is one thing which he did extremely well. And I think this is the trust which he built in the people, trust that he built even amongst us too as the United Nations as well, and helped in terms then of establishing the peace which we see in the country. And really what happened on that Sunday morning in terms of the smooth transition, I mean, it was really commendable. And when you looked on BBC to try to see what was being said about Namibia, there was nothing, because it had been so smooth. So really, congratulations to Namibia for that.
Mr. Akron, I know you've been waiting to add value to that conversation around the transition and the governance.
Okay, so first I would say that I recall when I met him the last time, one thing he said which makes me to really believe in his commitment to human rights is that he said, look, you're welcome to the country. Here you can say anything you want. I was shocked I was so shocked because there are some countries you can't even go more than 15 kilometers from the capital.
Yeah.
You need permission from government. Okay, so I was really shocked when he said, "Here you can say anything you want, and do your job. Feel free to do your job." Okay, that shows his respect for freedom of speech. Also, I just want to go a little back before I come to the question on accountability. You talk about accountability. I think he really believed in accountability. I recall during the World Children's Day, one thing he said was that he doesn't want a situation where we just come and sit here and talk to children and they participate. He wants what was done before. You know, we asked each head of state what they've done about it. That shows he opened himself up to be accountable to the people. I was so shocked because some don't even want to listen to you, let alone to open, to open himself up to be accountable to what he committed to. Now, talk about a transition. I think Namibia showed the world that when you have institutions and you respect them, there will always be peace. You know, the Namibia has a constitution. The constitution laid out the succession plan in case of the death of a sitting president, and that was fully followed and executed excellently well. And I think that this is a big example to the world. If we can follow institutions and do not bring our personal interests and preferences and selfishness into governance, I think a lot can be achieved. And we can also achieve peace in the world. Because most of the issues we have is because of selfishness in the world, self-interest, not the interest of the states. But he demonstrated that the state is more important. And that is why even before his time was up, I recall even when we held the Heads of Mission, Namibian Heads of Mission conference, he said that I think this is my last time to address you because next year I will not be president. So he did not. It was very clear he was going to go and another president will come because he believed that, a person comes, perform his duty, and when it's time he has to go. And I think he really performed his role as the head of state and the president of Namibia.
And that's even before time, you already say, listen, I'm not here to stay. Yes. I'm on my way out. This is the exiting party right now. Dr. Mary, you want to add some value to the transition conversation before we switch on? Ms. Alka, I see you also had something to say there.
Yes, it's also another conversation that I recall with His Excellency the President. When the head of WHO, Dr. Tedros, visited, he emphasized then the importance of strong institutions and the importance of building these institutions so that the countries would carry on, even when people were not there. And one aspect also in terms of accountability and also strengthening institutions was also during the COVID time. Yeah. During the COVID time, when there were challenges with vaccination for certain countries, particularly low-income countries in Africa, he also held the world accountable. He also commented, he raised his voice, he spoke to power to make a case for the need to the world to show itself accountable, that the vaccines needed to be distributed equitably. So you realize that the message of accountability was going throughout. But then also, in my own way, the day after the unfortunate incident, I also reached out to one of the core ministries that we work with, and just to express our sympathy, our condolences. And we were asking about some work. And one person said that the business of government continues. So really that was my experience, that unfortunately, His Excellency has passed on. But the institutions remain and the business of government continues. So really that has been our experience, that even though he's no longer there, the strengthened institutions make sure the business of government is continuing.
Well, if you just join us, a very good morning to you, of course, and welcome. We're having a special discussion and conversation looking at the life and times of Dr. Hage Geingob, the late president, the statesman, a global icon of governance, and democracy. And I'm joined in studio by the United Nations. Of course, the resident coordinator has come with her team from the different agencies representing the UNDP, World Health Organization, as well as UNICEF, to reflect on the life and times of this global statesman and icon of international peace and governance. Now, coming back to that issue, I really wanted to also reflect on particular issues, particularly the time of COVID-19 as well, and that response and the leadership that was required during that time, because it was quite fast, and we had to work together, particularly with the World Health Organization as well. At the same time, you're coming up with plans domestically, what you need to do, how you need to respond. And globally, I think there was also 2 or 3 weeks where the world wasn't really sure what was happening. Reflect a little bit on that, Dr. Mary.
Yes, thank you. We do recognize those were unprecedented times, and that was the word that was floating around, that they were unprecedented times. Yes, it was an unprecedented time for us within the UN and also for countries. As the UN, we came together to support the country in the response to the COVID pandemic. The resident coordinator's office nominated WHO to chair, but then all the other agencies were part of it: UNICEF, UNFPA, UNDP, UNAIDS, and all the agencies were part of the response. Now, from what we observed for Namibia, at the beginning of the pandemic, like you rightly said, a number of countries, all countries over the world, were not sure what did we need to do, how did we need to respond. And the president took the leadership, he empowered his team, and we worked together with the team. One of the things that we would recall that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was very quickly a structure that was set up at the airport to receive cases of COVID-19 when they occurred. And this was led by the president. You may have seen some pictures where he actually commissioned this place, and that was within the first month, even before there was any case. So you see that as soon as that happened in that unprecedented time, he led the response. And another thing that was also very commendable is that he also led a whole of government, a whole of society response. One would say that COVID-19, it was a disease, and typically you would say it was a health issue. But then we all realized quickly that it was not a health issue, it was a whole of government. So he led that response, so all the government institutions came together to rally behind the response, and then they provided a strong and a robust response to the pandemic. And then also it wasn't government as well, he also led society. So civil society, community members, community-based organizations all came together. But that leadership came from the government. So he made everyone recognize the importance of coming together, because there were unprecedented times. We didn't really know clearly. There was no blueprint that had been set out, but then he led that. And the benefit of this is we come again to the issue of strengthening institutions. So once that had happened, that whole of government response had happened, we now realize that we have built strengthened and resilient institutions to be able to deal with future pandemics, future epidemics when they occur, because we have strengthened our institutions. We have believed in that whole of government approach and whole of society approach to deal with that unprecedented time. Yeah.
So just to add to that, because as Mary mentioned, all the UN also had to come together to support. We had to pivot. We were working in different areas. So we had to pivot because these are unprecedented times. So we had to pivot our approach. So normally if UNDP won't be going too deep into health, for instance, but we did. We tried to support because that was at that moment a priority. And then we were also tasked to lead the socio-economic analysis and response. And I recollect that I, along with the former resident coordinator as well as Dr. Charles, the former WHO rep, we went to brief His Excellency on that. And the depth of his knowledge was sometimes astounding. He would ask you questions in terms of, we had done this whole socio-economic impact analysis of COVID.
Yeah.
And what are the kind of priorities we needed to do? Okay, but what are you doing about this in terms of, our informal traders also having been left by the wayside, literally, because their livelihoods came to a standstill suddenly. So he asked all of those questions because that's why I said the depth of his knowledge and his keenness that things would still function. And you know how keen he was in terms of keeping the economy afloat, the injection, the emergency grant which was given, how that would pan out, what is the other support that we as the UN could kind of give him. Yeah. So, I mean, these are some priceless moments I think we had with him, and something where we all learned actually.
Yeah. Mr. Akron, you wanted to say something there?
No, just to add that, at that time, during the pandemic, one of the biggest issues was most economies were also suffering, and there were no resources. Now, to make matters worse for countries like Namibia is a upper middle income country, and for those countries, they had to buy their own vaccines. So for the LDCs, the least developed countries, vaccines were supplied under the COVAX facility, where the global, economy decided to support free of charge. But Namibia had to buy. But he committed to buy the vaccines to make sure that vaccines came. And those days, I recall when the vaccines, the first wave, just one dose was $30.
Yeah.
Pfizer vaccine was $30 per dose. So, and they were not even available. But he showed his commitment under the leadership of, his leadership. There was that commitment to get the vaccines. And I think that is very commendable. He put people first before money. I think that is commendable.
We still continue with our conversation this morning. Special tribute by the United Nations. Joining us here in studio, of course, Namibia, a child of international solidarity. Without Resolution 435, there is no Constitution of the Republic of Namibia, and there is no Republic of Namibia. In the following insert, Mr. Dennis Francis, President of the United Nations General Assembly, pays tribute to Dr. Geingob during a special plenary session in memory of the late President of Namibia. Let's take a look at this as we continue with our discussion.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is with profound sadness that we gather here today to mourn the passing of His Excellency President Hage Gottfried Geingob, a towering figure in Namibian history and politics, and indeed a beacon of leadership on the African continent. As the third president of independent Namibia, the legacy of the late president is indelibly etched in the history of his nation's liberation struggle and the ensuing journey of freedom, democracy, and prosperity. His remarkable life journey epitomized true resilience, dedication, and unwavering commitment to the ideals of justice and equality, while his leadership was characterized by inclusivity, pragmatism, and a deep belief in the power of dialogue and cooperation. As chair of the Constituent Assembly, he played a pivotal role in drafting Namibia's constitution, thus laying the foundation for a democratic and pluralistic society. Throughout his tenure as Namibia's first Prime Minister and later as President, the late President relentlessly championed the cause of multilateralism here at the United Nations and at other fora in recognition of the importance of international cooperation and understanding in addressing global challenges, a contribution for which we will be eternally grateful. His impassioned advocacy for sustainable development and renewable energy earned him admiration and respect on the world stage, a vision that extended well beyond his country's borders, as evidenced by Namibia's green hydrogen sector. He will always be remembered for representing Namibia in these very halls, including as a petitioner to the Fourth Committee during the dark days of colonialism, articulating the aspirations of the Namibian people for a free and democratic Namibia, and later addressing the Assembly as his country's president on numerous occasions. As we bid this somber farewell to President Hage Geingob, we must nonetheless take solace in the enduring legacy of his principles and values. In honoring his memory, let us recommit ourselves to building a future worthy of his discipline and dedication to rebuilding modern Namibia, and indeed to multilateralism. May his great soul rest in eternal peace.
Well, that's the President of the United Nations General Assembly giving just a short snippet from his address at the special session that was put together for the President, of course, in his honor. We continue with the conversation. One of the things I really wanted to also bring up here, and what we know that the President was very passionate about, was the belief in multilateralism for maintaining world peace and social justice. And at the last Heads of Mission conference in November at the Safari Hotel, he again reiterated that and said, of course, we know that multilateralism is in a bit of a danger right now, looking at some of the global flashpoints, but we have to reinforce the trust in working together and the belief in these institutions. Ms. Pororo, just reflect on that a little bit, the importance of that, particularly at the time that the world is finding itself in this geopolitical crisis.
Okay. So yes, he really did push for multilateralism and really unifying the world systems. And I think it also comes at a timely point too, where even the UN is also, our Secretary General is really also, in every single remark or speeches which he produces, is always about the fragmentation and the breaking down of structures, institutions, and how then can we reform. So definitely multilateralism, for it to happen, the systems have to be reformed, because when we look at a lot of our systems which are in place right now, especially global level, you find that they are probably, or let me probably put and say that you find that the world has changed. Africa is becoming, also a mighty giant, I think, in the whole landscape. And yet, for example, we are not sitting in certain bodies like Security Council. One of the things which I think was a good development for Africa was when now Africa is part of the G20. Yeah, so that is really the way which we should be moving forward. And so, when I met him too in conversation with him, he also talked about the fact that Namibia is an upper middle income country. The classification of this country is problematic, and that means, of course, less resources for many countries, and all these resources now are going to sponsor wars and whatnot, and this is really not what is going to take us forward as a global system. So definitely that's a process, and it's going to take time. I think, but him just talking about it all the time, I think was really also very helpful, because it reminds us that we must not sit on our laurels, but let's keep on working towards unifying and becoming a better, a more unified system across the world. So initiatives too, like, for example, I think the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. That's one which will bring us together as a continent as well. And in Namibia, I know is quite active, very active in that process moving forward as well. So these are bodies which I think need to be looked at, the international financing institutions, how they can also be reformed to also be able to, look at the world from different lenses and not what it was when they were established many, many, many years ago. So it's a step, one day at a time, which he has started the conversation, and we just need to keep on building on it and keep fighting for that, because we can't stop. And this is not just recognized by His Excellency. I think in the space of the global leadership, it's recognized that it has to be reformed.
Let's reflect a little bit, of course, also on legacy and some of the work that is being done. Ms. Bhatia, I want to bring you in here as well. We know, of course, was very, very passionate about young people, but more so, of course, young people in entrepreneurship and business, and of course also bringing up the informal sector. He's really believed in the development of small and medium enterprises as sort of a powerhouse and an engine to deal with the issue around unemployment. And I know the UNDP has been crucial in implementing some of those programs to support that, particularly the likes of EmpriTech in connection with the Ministry of Trade. Reflect on some of the flagship programs that are running right now under the agency.
So I think when President Geingob ascended to the presidency, he inherited a decelerating sort of an economy, and therefore there was always that focus, how he has been trying right from the very beginning to start this process. And that's where the focus in terms of the small, medium enterprises comes, because that is the backbone of any economy. We know the larger private sector is sort of limited and very much part of the South African private sector, what we have. So what brings up a country, the productivity of a country, the wealth creation in a country comes from this group. And then 57% of the economy is in the informal sector. It's a huge percentage. So that has always been the focus of his government. And accordingly, we have been working with the Ministry of Industrialization and Trade. We've brought to Namibia internationally standardized program in cooperation with another sister agency, which is non-resident, which is UNTAG. They had designed this program. We brought it here. And now we've started running with that program. We've started training master trainers to impart that business training to small, medium enterprises. But then we realized that this is not enough, because what they need is finance, that access to finance. And some of our banking institutions, with due apologies, are very risk averse to giving this to them.
You don't need to apologize. I think we are suffering, so we know the risk aversion.
That's where then we started with a new concept in terms of a financing facility, where we tried out the system of grants. And it came on about at a time when we were this was in 2021. Yeah. So we are still reeling from the effects of the pandemic. Money was in short supply. So these grants, with that we sort of empowered people who were given training with also access to finance. Now we are taking it even a step further, trying to get in other partners, getting to have a revolving blended finance facility, again in partnership with the Ministry of Industrialization and Trade, and bringing also the private sector on board, who, by the way, are very keen to do that. So last year we even had this engagement with the private sector. I don't know why there is that feeling that they need to be invited to the table, but that's the other thing. This is in terms of how all parts, it's a whole, not only a whole of government approach, but it's also a whole of society approach. And we, as the United Nations, we are the development partners for Namibia. We are the kind of facilitators who can bring in this technical knowledge. We can connect to the best practices in the world, and that's exactly how we are doing it. So it's on the trade front we are doing it. It's on the governance, the institute, the legacy of the late president is in strengthening the institutions. We are starting off with a lot of work now in strengthening the work of the Anti-Corruption Commission. And not only looking at the commission, but actually even looking at the other line ministries in this regard. Because you can't just put it completely that it's the Anti-Corruption Commission, but unless and until, again, that
what are the supporting institutions and
supporting
stakeholders
institutions
around it?
that trust plus the transparency plus accountability equals to trust.
Yeah.
That needs to be internalized by everybody across all levels. It's not only at the ministry level, but even going down to our regional council levels. It's in small things like expending your annual budget. Are you returning the money back to the treasury?
Or
because if you return money back to the treasury, that is 2 steps backward in the development trajectory.
because it shows that there was no implementation.
So, and that implementation, now you've just hit, I was just going to come to that. Namibia has beautiful strategies, policies, and I hats off to the kind of a vision which has been there in terms of the thing needs to be done, they know what needs to be done. But there is still a gap in implementation. So how do we carry forward the president's legacy in actually plugging in this gap in terms of implementation and coming together?
So implementation is what I take as part of the legacy. Mr. Okran, from your side, going forward, what sort of legacy does it leave within your agency or the work that the agency does, and how do we carry that legacy on?
Okay, so just to add to what Alka just said, I think on the youth and making sure, especially when it comes to scaling the youth and dealing with the unemployment issues, all the UN agencies are doing a lot there. So you have UNDP, WHO, UNESCO, UNFPA, UNICEF, and as part of the job accelerator, everybody is contributing. Now, there are a lot of initiatives ongoing under the former president's leadership. For example, if you take the Upshift program, which through the UN, UNICEF was leading and working with other UN agencies, we've managed to look at the issue of the youth and not just dealing with the reskilling and making sure they have the right skills, but also giving seed money. And this I want to take opportunity to thank the donors. I don't want to mention names and leave some out because all the international, the traditional donors have been very active in this space. So just want to thank them. But I think one thing that the president was very much interested is making sure no one is left behind. So those from the marginalized communities, making sure these communities are also brought on board. So through that, there has been a lot of programs in the regions as well, working with governors and also some of the local councillors to make sure that, children from the right, categories are brought into this space as well. Now, in terms of going forward, I think what we realize is that having this individual, bit and pieces here and there, does not really solve the problem. So in order to keep the president's legacy, what we have decided is that the UNists, we want to have one program where we bring resources together and work with the different ministries to be able to tackle this issue holistically. So that is one of the things that I think for us to be able to keep his legacy, we need to unite as a government and also as the UN to be able to bring these resources and all the initiatives together to achieve the common objective of job creation.
And I think for me also personally, the Upshift program, I've seen the results of the program itself, just the quality of the interactions, the training, and eventually, of course, at the end where you have to pitch those ideas and how you're going to implement those ideas, because we don't have a lot of those platforms. And for a lot of those young people, some of them have ended up actually starting business and saying, look,
Exactly.
just to be able to sit down and present in front of the Minister of Youth, etc., that brings a different sort of confidence in me being able to go out there and continue building this business as well. From your side, in conclusion, from the WHO, what is the kind of legacy that the President leaves forward, and how do we continue that legacy?
One of the things that the President did was this approach of strengthening the country, building resilience in the country to deal with future epidemics, pandemics. And one of the things that we are doing together with the government is also Namibia, because of the leadership that Namibia showed. Namibia is actually one of 12 countries that has been selected for an emergency flagship within the region. So there has been a lot of effort to strengthen the capacity within the country to deal with emergencies. And the good thing is that this capacity does not remain in Namibia. Even before this happened, Namibia has gone out to support other countries. There's an emergency management team that has gone out to support other countries. And we believe that this kind of capacity will continue. As has been said, we have also the cooperation framework that the UN is developing, and is going to define the work of the UN from 2025 to 2029. And within this, the core principles that he stood for are well reflected in this cooperation framework. Leave no one behind, looking at the marginalized, looking at those who are at risk of being left behind. So those core principles are well reflected, and some of the key areas are also reflected from the National Development Plan, as well as the Harambee Plan, which he was very committed to. So those are some of the things that we will be taking on. We would continue with his legacy, and we will do it in the way that he stood for, as a United Nations here in Namibia.
Ms. Pororo, in conclusion, your final words to the Namibian nation and perhaps word of condolence.
Really, yeah, I often say, though, it's at times like this where you don't have many words to say, except really just to, stand in solidarity with the country, or with all of us who have gone through this loss, and particularly words of comfort to the former First Lady, as well as then to the family, and then to the entire Namibian population. And that really God will be the one to carry us through this very difficult moment, but at the same time to celebrate a life well lived, and really a strong foundation on which the country can continue to move forward. As the UN, we are sitting here committed, ready to partner, as we have been working, because one of the things is that he always had such an open door policy towards us as the UN. So we are really banking on that continuing as we move forward, and to then really play our part in the country as a partner to contribute to the broader and bigger goals of the country.
Thank you very much. Mr. Okran, you wanted to say something? I'll give you a few seconds quickly.
No, I just want to quickly say that, just to add to what Hopolong said, I think that he has lived his life very well. In my view, if you look at what 2 Timothy, Paul said in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7, he said, I've fought a good fight, I've completed the course. Now, I would say that he has completed his journey on earth very well. His legacy lives on, and for placing Namibia, at the center of the world, for recognition, for Namibia to be recognized, to chair the Summit of the Future with Germany in September this year, is a good recognition of what he stood for and what he's done. The Summit of the future. And I think Namibians should be very proud of this.
Definitely.
The president's legacy lives on, though he's dead.
100%.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for making time to join us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Well, of course, that concludes our conversation with the United Nations this morning.